And we're live.
Mhm.
What does it mean to write stories that matter, stories that stir the soul, awaken the imagination, and reflect truth in quiet, unexpected ways? In today's episode of Lead with Storytelling, we're sitting down with someone who has spent decades guiding others to do just that. Cynthia Beach is a professor of creative writing at Cornerstone University, the author of Curated Juices for Writers, and co-director of Scriptoria, a faith-based writing workshop she leads alongside author Gary Smith. With an MA in journalism and an MFA in fiction writing, Cynthia brings forth heart and craft to every sentence and every student. She's also a trained spiritual director, which means that when Cynthia talks about storytelling, she isn't just talking about characters and plots. She's also talking about calling or vocations, about paying attention, about how writing can become a spiritual practice. I'm sure that Cynthia would also be shedding some light on this. In this conversation, we'll explore what it means to write as an act of faith and how Christian fiction can move beyond cliches and why creativity isn't something we summon, it's something we're invited to steward. Whether you're a long-time reader, writer, a hopeful reader, or someone trying to make sense of your own story, this episode is full of wisdom, encouragement, and practical insight. And having said that, we cue the drum roll. You're welcome, Cynthia Beach. So happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I left out the part that you have recently published, The Surface of Water, which I'm looking forward to diving into. And just before we hit record, I was telling you how I'd spent a few hours, finishing up the last pages of this lovely story, and I can't wait to get into it with you.
Mhm.
So how are you doing today?
I'm well. It's Saturday morning. Dave and I will meet some friends later for lunch out. So looking forward to it. Yeah.
Awesome. I will toast to the lunch, light-hearted lunch and conversations. Yeah. I know my wife would be cooking up a storm for us today because it's a big family, and really looking forward to enjoying summer.
Yes.
Very bright weather. No rains today, actually. That's a good thing. All right, so getting into it, I know I'd introduced you as the expert, so to speak, on writing stories that matter and writing stories with heart. But what does this mean to you? I mean, what does it mean to say I've written a story that stirs the heart or stirs the soul or awakens the imagination? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeats, the poet, had a beautiful line that I fell in love with as a writer, and it was to write from the marrow of our bones. And he named a story that matters. And I immediately thought, writing from the marrow. And I hope that's what I do. So stories where people are human, characters are human, multi-dimensional, not just one-dimensional or caricatures, but complicated as we are.
How did you get into? I know storytelling is at the core of this conversation, and I'm always curious. How did you first stumble into this art and into this craft?
Yeah. I wonder if we are wired to be writers. So I remember as a girl, was I in first grade maybe? I'm unsure. But I was growing up in California, and we happened to be camping. So this would have been in the 70s with a tent and sleeping bags. And it was a favorite thing that we did as a family. And there is a type of popcorn, caramel popcorn, called Jack in the Box. Is that what it was called? I'm wondering. But it had gifts for children in it, and my box contained a little ring with a plastic red heart, and I loved my ring. And then I lost it. And maybe after, yes, as a child would, right? Camping. And maybe after an hour or two, I was walking along, and I remember the pine needles, walking through the pine needles, and a story came to me, and it was exactly what I had just experienced. A little girl loses her ring that has a heart, red heart, fake gem, and a year later she comes back to this campground and finds the ring. And it was like a story complete, and I felt like it came to me. And that was the start of maybe my storytelling. So I wonder, are we wired that way? I am unsure.
When you mentioned finding the ring, why I smiled was that it brought to mind the scene in The Hobbit where Smeagol lost the ring in the cave, and
Yes.
Bilbo found it. So
Yeah. How symbolic, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of symbolism, in your work, and I'm sure we'll get to that anyway.
Yeah.
Before then, you've written creative juices for writers who are seeking inspiration, and you kind of package this work in snackable content, as the blog might say. But what do you think writers get wrong about creativity?
I think there's a psychological aspect to creativity, and I would even add soul work to creativity, where creativity can excite self-destruction, I think. And I don't mean, I mean even resistance or avoiding what we're prompted to do, or even playing with words, or playing with cooking, or wherever our creativity surfaces, right? It could be, for some, it's tinkering on a car. For others, for me, it's sitting at my writing desk. But we can really self-sabotage, and I think that was the word I was aiming for. It can excite self-sabotage, where on one level, it could look like we put our creative time the last thing on our list. And if I clean my kitchen floor, then I get to be creative. I get to time in my writing room. And I think that would be an example of self-sabotage, all the way to simply saying no and never making time for it.
I get when you said that, it really, hits home, because, I think about times when I also say to myself that I wouldn't start a story, I wouldn't start an essay or an article unless I'd read this book, and this book, and and I still hold on to that. I don't know, and it's really, now I feel that yes, this is, I hear you, and it does cause that self-sabotage, as you put it, where I put off productivity.
Yes.
I've hit certain milestones, even as nebulous as they even seem, and unnecessary perhaps.
I think of it as exercise. So physically, I will make time for my exercise. I'll let myself do that, right? And when I began to see my creativity, my writing time, as something equal, in self-care even, not just the mission of why I think God has put me on the planet, but just my sense of mission as a person, I could allow myself to have it then, my creativity time. It became something I would build into my weekly goals. So I used a number of different approaches that got me writing and writing consistently. So everything from the famous word count, so many times a day, or a week, to having a writing buddy who I would check in with. I used many different tools until I got very consistent with it and no longer needed that external reinforcement to help. So in my mind, it's again like exercise. It runs very parallel, I think, to our habits.
You teach creative writing at Cornerstone University. How does your faith influence how you teach storytelling?
Yeah. I'll make a correction to that. I did teach. So in June 12th, Cornerstone of last year, a year ago, Cornerstone closed out most of its humanities department, and most of us were terminated at that point. But I did teach for 30 years, so I will reach into that experience. I found it wonderful that I could talk about faith and God when I was teaching everything from flash fiction to prose poetry to creative nonfiction. And to me, it's always been braided together. In my understanding, I saw God as very creative, the seahorse, St. Bernard puppies, and so forth. They're fireflies. The last week I've been standing out in looking at my meadow at probably about 10 p.m. and it's lit like flash bulbs are going off and the fireflies are back. So I find the world amazing that we live in. And it makes me conclude that God is enormously creative and there's creative play at work. So to bring that into the classroom was a wonderful thing. And I felt like it enlivened all of us in the room to understand that. I think there's a thread in some forms of Christianity that devalue fiction, that it's not truthful, or it's not real, like nonfiction is real, and that's actually plagued fiction beyond Christianity also. I mean, from the very get-go, novels were held in kind of some disrespect, but I don't share that value or that belief. I really believe in creativity and a God who is creative. I see Jesus Christ using parables. What does that mean for me as a fiction writer? So, yeah.
I think and I try to use theology sparingly, but in that thinking, you kind of come in parallel with Holly Ordway. She also teaches. I forget what she calls it now. It's sort of stems from C.S. Lewis's ecumenism, where he uses imagery as a tool for telling truth, metaphor or allegory, but
yes,
he differs. He doesn't defer to Tolkien. I think they actually had this classic debate about how to use allegory, and I look forward to going back to his work and to Tolkien's. But Holly Ordway seems to be kind of like her work seems to be a crucible of their thinkings. And when you mentioned how those symbols and symbolism and that you use, and how they are reflective of the face of God and His hand in creation. Thanks for sharing that. That was really affirming. And many writers now, especially Christian writers, struggle to balance storytelling with faith without, sounding preachy.
Yes.
And I like to use this as a seg into Surface of Water because, I have questions. And I promise I won't spoil this, but I have questions.
Okay. Yeah.
And I want to get it off my chest while it's still fresh, and you know how fresh. But what advice do you give to writers trying to write faith-infused stories that still feel authentic and compelling?
There's a division in Christians. So one camp I would call missional, and they're convinced they need to preach. And so they're convinced they need to preach even if they're writing fiction. Then the other side I would call formational, where it leans on things like symbolism. It leans on nature. It leans on maybe just a touch point, but short conversations about faith. It's very implicit versus the missional that would be very explicit in their conversation. So there's these two camps that I think can see each other as wrong, maybe. I would say my writing, I hope, is more formational. I value that. I value and trust these tools I can lean on. So everything from metaphor, water, in my novel entitled The Surface of Water, becomes a very strong metaphor, I hope, or at least it's pulled through the novel, the story, where it becomes, in a sense, the presence of God, the grace of God, that my character, this wildly successful megachurch pastor, has lost. So to lean on that and to trust that, that's where I write from. There's many tricks we can use as fiction writers. So in the area of craft, which is all about how do you build a story? So how do you write dialogue? How do you create a believable setting? Anything like that would be craft. There's these fun little techniques to use to avoid preaching. So one of them is called competing scripts. And that's where you have two characters who want opposite things. So I have two characters, main characters. Pastor Goodman, who wants to hide behind his image and his fame. He is not known, and he does not want to be known as a person. Then there's Trish, his new administrative assistant, who all she wants is to know this man. Okay, to see who he truly is in his soul. And so we have very sharp competing scripts going on that drives not just what they say to each other, but also their behavior. And that's one way of keeping it from becoming soft or mushy or overly sweet. So it's a technique I love.
Thanks. That's something to keep in mind. And I will hazard a very short review of the book, The Surface of Water. The story is riveting in the sense that you are drawn into these characters, into their lives, into their pain, into their joys, and you want to see how this unfolds. And at the point where I felt that one of the key characters, I was curious about how her character, that's Trish in particular, how her character was going to develop. I could easily, even if erroneously try to gesticulate what Pastor Goodman's trajectory was going to be, in terms of there's going to be a change, a catharsis, and he's going to be come out a different person on the other side. I could almost kind of guess that that's going to happen, but I couldn't exactly. Trish was tricky. Mm-hmm. Pun intended. Trish was tricky because she's presented as someone who is the model, and you begin to wonder, how does she come out on the other end? Does she because I guess one of the key characteristics of a very well-formed character, especially in a story, is you want to see how things pan out, or the story impacts the character and makes them either better or changes them. And but by the mere virtue of me saying that I was drawn by her character and by Pastor Goodman's, as well as some other characters as well, who I did not like, not that did not like I like as characters, but I did care about them in some sense. Jonathan, for instance, now I know we said we're not going to do spoilers, and really I hope I didn't spoil this for anybody, but you already said, or we've already established, you're doing a sequel of this book, so I'm looking forward to that. But honestly, I have some beautiful characters, or minor characters, that I hope in future we get to hear more about, and their work as well. So thank you for sharing this beautiful story about grace, about being just, about being merciful, about doing the right thing. Yeah. And I will definitely be handing this down to someone, or handing it to someone to please, hey, you gotta read this, and let me know what you think. So thank you so much for sharing that story. That brings me to my next question. I'm pained. I want to know. So in writing this story, which character was the hardest for you, and why?
Strangely enough, and maybe it's only strange to me, Pastor Goodman was not hard for me to write. I became a professor when I was young. So I was 24, turning 25, and I was really scared in my first classes. I was so nervous I would handwrite out my entire lecture on legal pads. So this was 1990 is when I started. And it was difficult for me to be the person in the room that was supposed to have the right answer all the time. And I really felt the burden of it. And that's part of where Goodman comes from, Pastor Goodman, to be that person where you are supposed to be the one who has it together spiritually all the time, right? So he was not difficult. Trish, on the other hand, was difficult for me. She's fierce, she's just, and the point that I felt rather unworthy to write about her was in her upbringing, which was so acquainted with the hard aspects of poverty. This was not my life. I was a dentist's daughter, and I had my horse, I had my clothes, I was given a car, I was given college also. So my life really benefited from my family's affluence in a way that Trish never had. She had the opposite situation. So in fiction writing, there's this trick where you interview your character. And I arrived at a place where I needed to hear from Trish that I could write her story, that she trusted me with it. And so I wrote her a letter about it, saying how I felt unworthy And then you can use your non-dominant hand to have the character answer, or just write, imagining your character. And I imagined Trish, what she might say to me. And what I heard was, there really aren't many people writing my story. So who else am I going to trust with it? And that gave me the permission. So she was difficult for me. Another character who is a minor character, Ronnie Goodman, is the pastor's wife. And I was challenged in an early draft that I was stereotyping her. And I don't want one-dimensional characters, you know. And I actually had to do some soul work because I'd been wounded by two different pastor wives. One was when I was probably about 16. My family had moved from California to Michigan and traveled maybe 20 miles to church. And I wasn't driving. I was just in high school, a freshman in high school. And the pastor's wife lit into me fairly early that she really had expected more from me in the youth group. And what was difficult about it was not appreciating how a cross-country move, what that would be like for a 14-year-old, right? And to feel like she expected me to carry the youth group became a wound to me. So, and another situation happened later. So I felt like I had to clean house on those experiences and do some forgiveness, do some soul work, and allow Ronnie to be more three-dimensional than what I originally had her be.
And I must say, I think one of the best qualities of your characters is how humane they are. Starting with Pastor Goodman himself, how human. I mean, you would expect, and this, takes us back to the comment we had made earlier about writing authentically or without, writing Christian fiction without cliches.
Yes.
Or that don't read like cliches. Pastor Goodman is anything but. And I must say again, I found Trisha, while she was adorable and admirable, she was also annoying. Thank you for that. Thank you for that in a good way. Annoying to me, and I can imagine the feathers that she ruffled also among the pastor wives, especially with her recommendation or nomination of Rahab. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if she did that on purpose, but
no,
it was just cute. And I read it, I bawled over. I was like, I could just imagine the looks on their faces.
Yes.
And, yeah. Oh my God, that was actually, I looked forward to some elaboration on her choice. There was a brief elaboration on that choice of Rahab, and I just wonder. And a lot of people could say a lot of things about, but I want to take you. Since I have you here, this is a rare privilege. So since I have you here, what do you find curious or interesting about Rahab that makes her, because she is, I don't know, maybe Thorne, there's the Christian writer Thorne who writes about these, she also writes fiction and historical fiction around characters in the Bible. I don't know if she's done any book on Rahab herself, but she's something that she's a very curious character. I hope somebody does something around her. But I want to hear from you. What do you find curious about Rahab that even made God to commend her, even as a prostitute?
Well, she's the exact opposite of what I was taught as a girl growing up in a conservative Christian denomination. And we would not have admired Rahab. We would have probably scorned her I'm sorry to say. And yet she's held up as courageous, smart, heroic, and so forth, and is named in the famous bloodlines. So that she's the exact opposite of the poster Christian woman. She breaks the category, and we need some people to break the categories, I think.
Okay. I know you're working on a sequel. So are you planning this as a trilogy, or is it going to be a series? Are we going to see more than just 3 books in this following this thread story?
I don't know yet. Yeah, we shall see. So I'm working on the sequel, and I think I'm about 3/4 done and ready to hand it off. We'll see who is interested in publishing that. But it has been a joy for all, and to work on, to be with the characters more. Now, early on, Jonathan, and he becomes a point of view character. So I have several in the novel. I rotate point of view, and Jonathan, the changes that he has to move through, to me, was very compelling, and who he is too. So,
wow, nice. Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to that. As I said, Jonathan is also another interesting character. And there are many interesting characters in this book, guys. I mean, if I were to pick each one of them and what made them very interesting, I'm sure Cynthia would be hounded by emails, begging her to take my money, write the story around this guy. But it's definitely something I'm looking forward to, and I'm putting you on my automatic buy list.
oh, thank you. It's like the ultimate compliment, right? Thank you.
Yeah. So you co-direct Scriptoria, a writing retreat that blends faith and crafts. What happens when people make space for both their spirituality and creativity in the same room?
Beautiful. It's a beautiful coming together. I've been able to do it. We ran it 3 times. 2022 was our first time. And then this past year we took a hiatus from it. But people kept coming back, and we had a high return rate, which was wonderful. So it's been a good thing.
Are there any particular Christian fiction books or authors you find yourself recommending often? What is it about their stories that stay with you?
I think for a story, for me to care about, it has to have a psychological realism to it, that the character operate as with the complexity that I believe we operate in. So that would matter to me. And I think touches of faith matter to me in a story. So I get to work with Barry Schmidt. He's been a long-time mid-grade novelist, and he is a firm believer, but is in the formational category where his novels don't preach, but they touch on elements of faith. And I love the story that does that, because I think that's part of what I believe about our world and who we are.
If someone feels called to write, but overwhelmed by where to begin, what would you tell them?
Build the writing skills. So just like exercise, I'll return to that analogy. If I have not been exercising, I can't go run 2 hours, right? I have to start with jogging 1/8 of a mile or something like that. So I think that can help us understand. A lot of us have to build up the writing muscle before we can really do it consistently. So that's what I would recommend. Even journaling and just dumping ideas builds the writing muscle. So starting small. In fact, I'm a great believer in small goals. I used them when I was a very busy writing pro. I would have a goal like 350 words 4 times a week, or 15 minutes 3 times a week. And oftentimes, after 15 minutes, it was enough to get momentum, and I'd stay in my seat longer if I could.
Awesome. Cynthia, we come to this segment of the interview. I didn't tell you about this before. It's we usually have rapid fire questions.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
What's your go-to comfort food?
Chocolate.
Ooh. Okay. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Oh, now that's a tough one. Charlotte Bronte.
Ooh, that's interesting. Why?
She wrote a stunning book, and as a woman in her day, for her to write and have a novel published was incredible. So yeah, Charlotte Bronte.
Beach or mountains?
Pardon?
Beach or mountains?
Mountain. Despite my last name.
Ironic, and also not necessarily symbolic as well, because we know a certain other lady who likes to hike mountains.
Yes, absolutely. Rainier is one of my favorites. Yeah, it was the novel.
Favorite book that impacted your life?
A book that I read that impacted my life? Anything by the late Walter Brueggemann. Incredible theologian.
Okay.
Prophetic Imaginations is beautiful. Yeah.
Looking, I'll share a link to that book so everyone can check it out. What's a skill you've always wanted to learn but haven't had the chance to yet?
Waltzing. Really
interesting. Okay, something to aspire to.
Yeah.
Cynthia Beach, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I want to thank you for your time and for your expertise, sharing your expertise as a spiritual director, as a writing coach, and a mentor. But best of all, as thank you for sharing the gift of your books and your stories. I will be talking about this for a long time, and I am looking forward to all the other books and stories that will be following into.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, great conversation.
I'm glad.